There's a quote that has inspired and haunted me my whole life. It's a quote by the French physicist Jean-Baptiste Perrin. He said that the aim of all science should be to substitute visible complexity for invisible simplicity. Think about E equal mc squared. Energy equal mass times the speed of light squared. It's a really simple mathematical correlation, but it explains an enormous amount of complexity, visible complexity. My passion is the science of decision making. Now, when you think about making decisions, especially the really tough ones where getting it right or wrong can make a huge difference in your life or in your organization, there's an incredible amount of visible complexity. And when we say complexity, we include all the aspects of complexity, which can be sort of lovingly referred to as VUCA. V for variability. There will always be variability in performance, in demand, and supply. The U is for uncertainty. You can't predict accurately what will happen in the future. There will be unplanned events. C is complexity. So the complexity normally in that sense relates to all the interconnections. If I touch one part, it could touch many other parts. For example, in a retail environment, if I'm launching a new product, the success of the launch of the new product is highly dependent on the amount of inventory of the previous model in the system. But that's commonly ignored when you are preparing forecast for the sale of the new product. So that's the first C in VUCA. The second C is for constraints. There will always be some resource that you don't have enough of to achieve the goal that you've committed to, or a resource that if you had more of it, you could achieve more. And those resources typically relate to demand, capacity to meet that demand, supply to get enough inputs to produce enough of the product or service to meet the demand, and cash. And then of course then from a human aspect, there's our limited attention, our limited trust, and our limited motivation and energy. So the second C is about constraints, and the A in VUCA is for ambiguity of competing measurements. So we not only have to be effective, but we also have to be efficient and compliant. These are the factors that make things really, really difficult when it comes to making decisions, because I have to consider all of these aspects when I make a decision. So that is the visible complexity about decision making. Is there this profound but invisible simplicity when it comes to decision making? And I discovered it, and when I discovered it, it was like the heavens opened up and I heard the voice and the singing of the angels. Is that we can think about any decision that we make in the simple mathematical equation, similar to E equal to mc squared, is E plus R equal O. Event plus response equal outcome. So let's deconstruct it a little bit and see why it's so profound. Well, think about E for events. Events can be positive and negative. These are the things that will happen in your life, that even though you could potentially influence them, they are really out of your control. A negative event would be somebody that criticizes you, or a product launch that failed, or a relationship that failed, or somebody that passed away, or some part doing something that is hurting the rest of the system. There are positive and negative events, and we all will have positive and negative events. And how many of each you have to a large degree is just luck. Now think about the R. The R is our response. It's the only thing that's really in our control. And like events, you can have positive and negative responses. And that ultimately determines the outcome, whether the outcome will be positive or negative. Now, when you start to look at that equation, it looks deceivingly simple, but there's a lot of things that it can tell you. First of all, is what events should I respond to? Because we have limited attention, what events should I respond to? Well, you should only respond to events that is consequential, that will have a profound impact on you, positive or negative, and that you can actually do something about. So that's kind of the first aha moment, to say, I need some kind of mechanism that tells me whether an event that just happened requires or could benefit from a response from me. And what you'll find out is that as soon as you put this kind of question in your mind, should I respond to this or not? Is this really important for me to respond? Is there actually something I can do that could make this better? You'll find that you immediately become much less overwhelmed, because there's many things that we simply shouldn't respond to, either because they're not important or because there's not much we can do about it. Now, let's think about the R, the response part. Any response requires thinking, and thinking demands a lot of our energy. And it also can trigger all sorts of anxieties about what is the best response, am I going to get it right, what if it fails, what if this is not the best thing, what if I get blamed. So over time, essentially what we do is we try to automate as many of these responses as possible. In fact, by far the majority of our decisions, of the 35,000 odd decisions that we make every single day, is essentially in completely automatic mode. It's some kind of rule of if, then. If this event happens, then respond in this way. Fully automatic. Some of those automatic responses or reactions comes from our genes. For example, we have 4 types of responses to an event, which is to flee. If it's negative, the best thing to do is normally, if you can, just get away from it, if it's dangerous to you. If that's not an option, then freezing would be the second best choice. Just freeze and hope it just passes without it noticing you. If that's not an option and it actually notices you, then the third response, which is fawning, it's not the same as freezing. Fawning is being submissive, it's actually playing along. If you think about a small little dog being kind of attacked by a bigger dog, they just roll over and they kind of play along, hoping that the dog will not hurt them, the bigger dog will not hurt them. So that's the third response, fawning. The fourth response, of course, if none of the other 3 are options, would be fighting, right? Fighting back, trying to fight your way out of the problem. Now, those are the 4 automatic reactions that we all have, but we can also learn them, and we can develop a bias towards one or the other. For example, for some people, fighting is not the last option, it's the first option. For them, it's the only way that they believe, or the best way to protect themselves, and they immediately go on attack. Essentially do it to them before they do it to you. So these are the challenges, is that the R, even though it stands for response, essentially the majority of the time we don't respond, we react in fully automatic mode. If this event, then react in this way. And that's a challenge, because reaction can cause us to over or underreact. Now, if it's not a consequential decision, it doesn't matter. Like what to wear, what to eat, which route to take to work, how to respond to somebody, should I respond or not? All of those things are thousands and thousands of decisions that we make every day. The majority of them don't matter, but a few do. So that's the next part of the visible complexity here, is how to decide when to react in fully automatic mode and when to respond. And Viktor Frankl said there's that brief pause of moment, from the moment that you get a stimulus until you react, that you can intervene in that. And just do a check. Is this an important event or not, whether it's positive or negative? If it is important, take the moment and just slow down your thinking. Maybe take a deep breath or a couple of deep breaths. Get yourself into a relaxed state of mind and then decide how to respond. And that's the fifth type of response that we could have. It's for most people not automatic, but it can be learned to be automatic, which is essentially the fifth F in that. So fleeing, freezing, fawning, fighting, what's the fifth F? Is flow. Put yourself in a state of mind where you are relaxed, and in that state of mind, in that flow state of mind, you can be hyper creative and hyper productive. And getting into that state of mind can be, like anything else, learned and practiced, so that that becomes the automatic response you have when there's a critical event that happens. And I'm sure you have had many of those moments when something really good or bad happened. You realize that your response here is going to make a big difference, and you just took a deep breath. You think about what has just happened, and you try to come up with the best possible response. So when it comes to mistakes in decision making, one of the things that we study as decision scientists, I would say that the three most consequential mistakes that we make is we don't have a good mechanism to decide when to respond and when not. We don't differentiate between the many things that are happening that we really shouldn't respond to, all the noise in the system, and the signal, things that tells us that we should respond. So we need a mechanism to reduce or even avoid that kind of mistake, reacting to something we shouldn't or not reacting to something that we should. Those are the two types of mistake in number one. Number two is that we go into fully automatic mode. We react without thinking. What should we do? We should slow ourselves down so that we don't get into automatic mode, which is going to cause us to react in one of those first four Fs, but to kind of put ourselves in that state of mind where we can get into flow. And when we get into flow, we become hyper creative, hyper productive. We are really good at figuring out what is the best possible response to do that. But that's not enough. Is putting yourself into the state of mind is definitely a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. And that comes to the third part, which is, how do I decide what's the best response to have? And that's an interesting question. It's something that I've been working on for a long time, which is, the first thing that you have to do is to realize that there's always at least two responses that you could have. You could change something or not change something, or change something versus change something else. So think about it as the tactics that you could have, right? Do, don't do, or do something else. So that's the first thing to kind of condition yourself. Always realize that there's at least two options that you have. We tend to be biased and think that there's only one option. What makes it difficult is that whatever two options you come up with, these two options will each have a unique pro or set of pros or positives, but they will also have one or more unique cons or negatives. And that makes it tricky. It's already tricky enough to evaluate one response because it has pros and cons. How do I decide whether to do it or not? But now I have two responses, and each one of them have pros and cons. So that's the first challenge. But it's important to put ourselves in that situation that says, what are the pros? What are the two options that I have? Change, don't change, change one thing, change to another thing, and then to list down what we assume to be the pros and cons. And here's the next level of complexity that we face, is that it's impossible to accurately predict the likely pros and cons of any event. So how do we overcome that? Well, we need a mechanism to think through not the likely case, but the best and worst case. It turns out that our intuition is quite strong when it comes to predicting best case and worst case. And for many decisions, that's actually the only thing that we require. So think about the decision that you're facing, and you've estimated the best case benefit, the worst case benefit. You've tried to estimate the best case cost or effort versus the worst case cost or effort or risk. What would you do if you realize that the worst case benefit is still greater than the worst case cost? That would be an easy decision, right? I call it a hell yes decision. Worst case benefit is still bigger or much bigger than the worst case cost. Don't even think about it, do it. It's something that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. Now, what if the best case benefit is not much greater than the best case cost? I would call that a hell no decision. Now, your first estimate would just be what it would be the best case benefit versus worst case, what would be the best case cost versus worst case. But of course, we're not going to leave it there. So what you want to do is to put yourself into a state of mind where you're now moving towards not just evaluating two options, but actually creating new options. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One would be to say, let me think about this option that I feel most pressure to take, which is to make some kind of change to respond to this event. I've estimated the worst case, best case benefit versus cost. What is it that I can do that can get the worst case benefit to be closer to the best case benefit? It doesn't help to improve the best case benefit, because that's already probably big. I want to find ways of increasing the worst case benefit. And when it comes to cost, I want to find ways of reducing the worst case cost or effort or risk, so that I can make that gap between the worst case benefit and the worst case cost, effort or risk bigger and bigger and bigger. And the bigger I make it, the more of a hell yes decision it becomes. So that's one way of essentially creating new options. There's another way, which is to say, this change that I'm considering, why is it not a viable change right now? Is because somehow by making this change, there's a unique pro, the unique pro of not changing that I'm going to have to give up. And there's the unique con of the change that I'm going to have to live with. I do not want to sacrifice. I do not want a solution that requires a compromise for me to have to give up anything that I want to keep or have to live with something that I don't want. So to create a new option is to essentially just ask yourself a very simple question. Rather than thinking about what you should give up, think about what you can add. What can I add to this change I'm considering so I don't have to give up the positive that I associate with the status quo? And what can I add, the second plus, so I don't have to live with this unique con of the change, either the effort or the cost or the risk? Let's take an example. Let's say that there's an event that has happened. You've just gone to the doctor. The doctor has given you a pretty serious diagnosis to say, Alan, unless you change what you eat, you are going to die much, much sooner than what would be required. So now I'm facing a decision. I have this bad habit of snacking when I'm stressed, and mainly sugary stuff. My favorite is ice cream. So now I'm facing a decision. Quit snacking when I'm anxious, versus the status quo is to keep on doing it. Now, what's the benefit of keep on doing it? There must be a benefit, else I would have stopped it a long time ago. The unique pro of my status quo is that it helps me to cope with stress and anxiety. Okay, what is the unique con of absolutely going cold turkey, quitting right now, today, never snack again? Is I'm scared of the effort it would require, the mental energy to keep on reminding myself, and of course, how I will feel if I try it and then fail. Because I have tried before, and it sucks when you catch yourself snacking again and you just go, what the hell? Life is too short. So how do I create a new option that's viable? So the change is not viable, but it can be viable if I turn it into change plus plus. So change, quit, snacking, first plus, what can I add to this idea of quitting so I don't have to give up having a way of dealing with stress? I'm sure you can think of some ways. Maybe meditation is one. Or just taking deep breaths. As soon as I get the temptation that I'm starting to feel anxious and I realize, then I put myself into that state of mind where I take deep breaths, I get out of that anxiety state and I go on. Or I do something else. The other one is the effort that it would require to give up this thing. Is there something I could do to reduce the effort and the cost? Well, I could probably go online and say, I want to stop snacking, have a look at YouTube and see what's the simplest, shortest, best way of quitting that has helped other people and learn from them. And that becomes my 2 pluses. A good friend of mine came up with a really fantastic mechanism that has really helped him. I've tried it and it works really well. He said, why do you eat? This is only 2 reasons. You're hungry or you're anxious. So whenever he catches himself wanting to eat anything, whether it's proper food or snacks, he asks himself, are you hungry or stressed out? And if the answer is stressed out, then find some other way of dealing with the stress. So that's, again, this invisible but inherent simplicity when it comes to decision making, is we make a whole bunch of mistakes. We react to events that we shouldn't react to because they're not important or there's nothing we can do about them. We react rather than respond. So we end up often overreacting and doing something that makes the situation worse, not better. Or we underreact, we procrastinate, and then the event keeps on hurting us. Or we don't fully capitalize on it if it's a positive event. And before we know it, the opportunity is gone. And that's an important part to remember, is that you have a positive event, you react positively, you get a double positive. You have a positive event, you react negatively, it wipes it out, wipes out the positive. It's a 0. You have a negative event, but you react positively, you can wipe out much, if not all of the negative. Think about somebody walking up to you and giving you a compliment, right? And you say, thank you so much. I really, really needed that positive response. You get a double positive from that. They feel appreciated. You benefit from it, double positive. Now think about the same scenario where they come and give you a compliment and you go, what do you want? It just wiped it out. They probably will unlikely give you a compliment again, and you will forever not have that opportunity from them to feel recognized. If it's a negative event and it's a negative response, it's a double negative. From that simple equation, we can realize that a negative response can never have a positive outcome. It can only make things worse or much worse. And that's our challenge, is how do I put myself into a situation where I can come up with a positive response? First of all, remember that there's always at least 2 responses that you can have. Change, don't change. Secondly, remember that each of these have got unique pros and cons. And rather than trying to weigh them up against each other and see which is the best, a better way of doing it is to pick the one that you feel strongest about, like the change that you're thinking about making. Like if the event is, I just got into a huge argument with my spouse or with a business partner or with a colleague, and a change I feel pressure to make is to realize I'm never going to lose my temper again, versus the status quo where I allow myself to lose my temper from time to time. Maybe never losing my temper is my preferred choice, and to make it a viable option I have to turn it into change plus plus. What can I add, not give up, but what can I add to that change so I don't give up on the benefit that I thought could only come from losing my temper? And what can I add to this change to prevent any negative, either effort or cost or risk, that I associate with losing my temper? That's how I create new options. So that was, to me, the profound insight, is that there is this profound and inherent but invisible simplicity when it comes to decision making. And we can understand all of our decisions and those of other people through the simple equation of E plus R equal O. Yes, there's complexity. Yes, we need a mechanism to decide which events we should respond to or not, versus which events it's okay to just react in fully automatic mode. We have to figure out when to react, when to respond, and what is the best response, or at least a response that will make things better or much better, not worse or much worse. And then the last part is understanding that the outcome is a direct effect of our response. So the last thing I want to leave you, which is often the first thing that you should do when you're trying to figure out the response, something that all of us probably know we should, but we almost never do, is when an event happens, positive or negative, the first thing you should do is not to think about the response, but to think about what's the outcome that you want. And often, once you are very clear about the outcome, even if it's at the level of, I want the outcome to be better and not worse than the current status. So if I get into an argument with my spouse or business partner, the outcome I want is to use this opportunity to leave our relationship in a better position and not a worse position. Because now you have criteria for deciding whether a response is good or not. Will it help or not help? Will it be helpful or harmful? So that to me is the last portion of that inherent but invisible simplicity when it comes to decision making, is start with what's the outcome that you really want. I hope that this was useful. We apply this framework in every single method that we develop in our research lab and every single app that we develop, including the most advanced apps like our digital twins. Organizations use those digital twins because they know that there can be positive or negative events that happen. They know that their existing software, planning and optimization software, cannot fully consider all the VUCA conditions, and yet they are expected to make reliable commitments, and they're expected to make reliable or better decisions, faster decisions. They can use our digital twin to model these positive and negative events, to see the impact of these positive or negative events on not just a part of a system, but a whole system, not just a business process or company, but their whole supply chain. And then they can decide whether to respond or not. And then they can also test out various responses. We have a whole library of best practices. Whether it's our supply chain digital twin or project management digital twin, we have a whole library of best practice that says, if this happened, what if we responded in this way versus the traditional way? Would this make it better or worse? An unplanned event has just happened, or it can happen. We put it into our model, we see what's the impact. Yep, it's going to impact us massively or not. If it's not, then don't respond. Don't be tempted, because most probably you'll just make it worse. Or, yes, you should respond because the consequences of not responding is really bad. Let's try out various responses. So that's how we use this simple framework, even in some of our most advanced work, where we are trying to make progress towards achieving our goal of helping individuals and organizations make better, faster decisions when it really, really matters. Until next time.